Spielberg, Matthew.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Good morning.
Hello.
Good morning to you, and thank you for being in Paris. I mean, we are so emotionally proud that you are here in Paris. So please, let's start the question. Where's the first question? Over here, please.
Hi. Thank you for being in Paris and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Ma question est, l'histoire du film se passe dans les années 70, mais le propos est quand même très très moderne par rapport à la liberté de la presse. Je voulais savoir si c'était justement ça qui vous avait intéressé, ce côté très moderne de l'histoire. Est-ce que vous pensez que la presse doit encore se battre aujourd'hui comme elle le faisait dans les années 70?
Well, obviously we're very much in the 70s, but this is a very modern take, and this is unfortunately a very relevant question about freedom of the press. Is that what interests you most in the Post? And do you feel that the press can fight as hard nowadays as it could in the 70s?
The press has to fight harder today because the press is under attack more today than they ever were in the 70s. So they have to fight harder to essentially, fight for their own dignity in the truth that they're telling the general public. But my first attraction to the script, before I thought about any of the obvious relevant connections between 1971 and 2017, was the character of Katharine Graham and her relationship with Ben Bradlee. That was the first thing that popped off the page for me. A story about a woman in a great position of authority who did not know how to sustain that authority because she hadn't yet found her voice.
Question ici.
Bonjour, Olivier Boucreux, Télé 7 jours. Donc c'est une question pour tous les trois, en fait. Je voudrais savoir ce que vous avez appris, en fait, de cette histoire, de votre personnage, de votre partenaire et peut-être de vous-même avec ce film.
Well, this is really a question for the three of you. Doing the Post, I mean, basically, what did each of you learn about maybe the story, about through your character, maybe about your co-actor, and possibly even about yourselves?
Take it away, Meryl.
Yeah, Meryl. Let's hear you.
Well, the more I learned about Katharine Graham, the more I was in awe of her. Her intellect, her stamina, her curiosity, her ability to lead and in the most graceful way, and her writing ability, because she wrote a 780-page autobiography that won the Pulitzer Prize. That was yet another revelation to the people who knew her. But the most important thing I learned in reading about her in talking to her children, and in talking to the woman who assisted her in researching the autobiography, and the woman who assisted her as a colleague for 30 years, was how insecure she was how consistently self-doubting she was. And that's something that I think gives a particular poignancy to this story, because that's the story of many, many, many women, not just of her generation, but of women now who emerge into leadership roles and still suffer the same kinds of crippling curbs on their ability to step forward, to be aggressive, to take risks, to lead in essence. So that was the surprise. I share many of those insecurities, and I thought, well, that's because you're an actor, and it serves you to deconstruct yourself every time and to take down your confidence, because that's when you leave yourself vulnerable, and that's when you can actually do the work of an actor. But I suspect that there's the other thing too that accompanies many women as they become bigger than they ever thought they would be.
What about you, Tom?
Well, the overpowering fact that I learned about Ben Bradley, I had met Ben Bradley before. I had met him through Nora Ephron. We had had dinner. I'd been at his home. I knew Sally Quinn, his wife, very well. She and I spent an awful lot of time together talking about the man. His enthusiasm for what he did matched, I think, his sense of responsibility to being a journalist. And in the case of specifically this week in his life, in the life of Katharine Graham, he had this dictum: the truth is the truth, and you got to run it. If it's the fact, you got to put it there. And otherwise, if you're not, why have a newspaper? Why have the job? Why try to sell? Why to sell copies of the daily events for 50 cents a piece? That is a very forceful, and what's the word I'm looking for? I think that's a kind of like there's a surety to that comes into the way. Luckily, I got to approach the workday. I can't. I've worked with Steven for 5 times. I am empowered by his dictum to me, which is go out, find out everything you can about the guy and the event, and then on the set, show me what you have. That's a luxury that I've been able to enjoy multiple times. What I have not, what was new territory for me was being in the same movie with Meryl Streep, and it just so happens, I think, that these two characters blended in nicely for ourselves. The confidence that I had because I was familiar with the territory, and the mystery of working with Steven that enshrouded Meryl through the course. I must say I got to stand back and quietly enjoy the fact that I had sandbagged her by not telling her that Steven does not rehearse. We better know our stuff. We better have ideas. We better come and get it. And the first couple of days, she was just so flummoxed by that reality.
You loved it.
I loved every minute of it. I just loved watching her squirm and wonder what the heck is going on. And I just kind of like, hey, babe, you got to keep up. Let's keep up. Keep up with us now. It was fun.
All right, next question then. Over here. Devant. You have the mic here? Yeah. It's your go. You have the mic.
Okay, sorry. I'm Marcus, tutor from Berlin, and this is a question from Mr. Spielberg. Mr. Spielberg, I read that you were in the middle of your next big science fiction movie and then decided to make the post because you thought it's so urgent to do this movie. Could you explain with your own words what maybe has to do with the situation in the States?
Well, it's very sobering when I'm making a science fiction movie where there are no rules. Science fiction, it allows the limited use of the range of your imagination. And of course, then when I read about this true story about what happened in 1971 with Nixon going after the New York Times and the Washington Post, and then a woman looking to, be able to find herself in a sea of men. And there was so much relevance to both of those topics that I suddenly started to celebrate history again, thinking it's great to use your imagination and where the sky's the limit, literally. But what happens when you are limited by the facts of what took place? I feel so comfortable allowing history to be the co-author of my movies, actually more comfortable in that genre than I am, or I certainly used to be, in the genre of limitless musings and dreamings. So this was a great relief to me to read the script. And I also obviously felt, okay, we got coffee machine. And the coffee machines in 1971 were nothing like that. It took a half an hour to get your coffee warm in 1971, at least that. But it also took a lot longer to print a newspaper. And one of the great joys of this movie is being able to show all of you the craft and the art of news printing. Reporting is pretty much the same. News gathering is pretty much the same, except back then you had to have enough change in your pocket to use the rotary telephone, in the phone booths. You had to hail a cab. You had to knock on a door. You had to get your sources to answer the door. You know, today it's actually not as complicated because less legwork, but because there's so much competitive landscape, there are so many stories and there are so many sources to disseminate those stories, and it's much more competitive. In that sense, it's a lot harder today to succeed in this business. But the one thing that both of these eras have in common that really attracted me also to tell this story is two presidents declaring war on the news media. Nixon did not succeed, and he wound up, you know, resigning. And I really feel that we shall overcome what all of us have been subjected to over the past 16 months.
Question.
Bonjour, Barbara Appel du Journal du Dimanche. Je voulais savoir, Steven, ce qui vous pousse toujours à tourner à un rythme assez effréné. Vous avez deux films qui sortent l'un dans la foulée de l'autre. Et qu'est-ce qui vous donne toujours envie de réaliser des films et qu'est-ce qui, pour vous, fait une bonne histoire?
Well, obviously you have two films almost coming out in a row. I mean, Barbara wanted to know what pushes you really every time, what gives you the joy and the wish to work on such a frantic rhythm, and what is to you the essence of a good story?
I think the thing that gets me to keep working with enthusiasm and a lot of energy is the same thing that got Ben Bradley to get up every single morning, which all he cared about was a good story. He wanted a good kick-in-the-ass story, and he would go to great lengths to find the story and to go to Kay Graham to get her to allow him to publish the story. But I'm fired up the same way Ben Bradley was fired up. All I need is a good story. And I lose 20 years of chronological age. I'm suddenly 50 years old again. You know, so 15. Well, sometimes I act like I'm 15, but I feel like I'm 50.
Question ici. Oui.
Hello, Mr. Spielberg. It's a question for you. It's your first newspaper movie, like All the President's Men. So did you think of a specific style to tell this story, or did it come to you immediately, naturally?
The style of telling the story came to me pretty quickly because I worked very, very closely with the second writer, Josh Singer, who did, I think, 27 drafts of the script after I had read the initial Liz Hannah script, which was very, very good script, and got this whole sort of show on the road. But in infusing the script with Josh with a lot of energy, scenes being short, scenes not being 7 pages, but being 2 pages, sometimes 1.5 pages, it made me feel like we were telling the story from the point of view of a new